Hello there, students. This is Mr. Verzat, and today I'm going to give you a brief introduction to one-point perspective. Now, many of you who have had art in this school district in junior high have already been exposed to this, in which case it'll be a refresher course or a different presentation of the material in a different way that hopefully may stick a little bit. Those of you who have not taken this, just to let you know, we are going to fly through one-point perspective. We're not going to spend much time on it. We're actually going to jump into two-point perspective and spend a little bit more time later. This is just going to be an intro with this screencast, and we'll just kind of go over the basics of it. This screencast assumes that you've already seen the screencasts about a horizon line and also what a vanishing point is, and an X, Y, and Z axis, though we'll be touching on it briefly during the screencast. So let's take a look here. This is one-point perspective. If you look at these shapes here, I'm sure that you guys are familiar with it. You've seen probably blocks or cubes hovering in space. I thought it would be just kind of fun to change things up and kind of make really weird, irregular looking shapes, which is perfectly possible. One-point perspective, if we look at it and break it down, is simply a perspective technique that uses only one vanishing point on the horizon line. Not that hard, is it? Yeah. And another way that you can tell that it's one-point perspective is if there is an X, a Y, and a Z axis, all three of those. Now, one point is the only perspective technique to have an X-axis. And let's just quickly review what an X-axis is. If we look at this cube right here, an X-axis is any plane or line that goes left to right and is flat. So, for example, I see a line that goes left to right here. That is flat. Therefore, there is an X-axis here, and it's one-point perspective. All right? Now, I also see, let's just review the axes really quick. There is a plane that goes up and down in your face here, and that is the Y-axis. All right? And finally, the Z-axis is just a term that I use to say any plane or line that recedes off in the distance, that gets smaller, that gives it that look of 3D. And sure enough, here one is, right here. All right, there's one here, here. Any plane or side that goes off into the distance and gets sucked into that vanishing point, like a black hole. Exactly. So, let's go a little bit more into some detail here what it is, and then we're going to look at some examples, non-examples, and we're going to take apart a couple of pictures. Alright, so one-point perspective. How is it used? Why is it used? Because there's several different types of perspective. Well, one-point perspective is the most basic. It's used when looking directly down a receding area of space, such as, say, like an alley, a street, or a hallway. Alright? Though it's the most basic method, it's also the most limited. You can't do much with it. The most you could do with it, you could do some fun letters, some cubes, a very basic hallway shot, or it's great for, say, like if you're an interior designer and you want to get a very static, static meaning it stays put in one spot, not very dynamic. A static shot of the inside of a room to really show off kind of where everything's at in there. It's very static. One-point perspective is typically pretty boring. It lacks energy and movement. Movement is that principle of design, which involves the path that your eye goes through the piece, and also the action that takes place in the piece. If there's only one vanishing point, there's not much going on in there. All right. One-point perspective, it's great for letters. It's great for communicating a sense of depth or volume in a shot. And for, once again, formal documentation of an interior. Not much else, though. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. This is a shot of an interior underwater hotel room. And as you can see, sure enough, everything goes to one vanishing point, which is in the middle. Now, just to let you know, one-point perspective, you don't need to have your vanishing point in the center. You could have it on the left side, the right side, anywhere you want, as long as it's on the horizon line. And that goes for any type of perspective. And notice how all of the z-axis lines, all the lines that recede off in the distance, they get sucked into one area. All right, so let's go look at some non-examples. All right, here's an example of another interior design, but there's something kind of weird about it. Strange. Look at the one on the left, and now look at the one on the right. Strange. This one on the right does not have an x-axis at all. There are no areas on this that are perfectly left to right flat. There is no x-axis. Interesting. The reason why, and you'll learn in the future, is because this is in two-point perspective. Two-point. There's no x-axis. There are actually two z-axes because there are two vanishing points that suck up the lines. So two areas that recede off into the distance. So in this picture, everything is slanted except the y-axis, things that go straight up and down. So yeah, pretty interesting. This is just an introduction. We'll get into more detail on how to do it a little bit later. But let's look at some examples of some different interiors. This one you've already seen. This one's pretty cool. Let's play around with it. Let's look for the horizon line and the vanishing point in all this. And let's try to see if we can tell if it is in one-point perspective. See if we can't find the horizon line. Now, once again, the horizon line is the part of is an imaginary line that represents your eye level in the piece. And if I start, and I can actually tell where it's at by getting to the area where we can no longer see above things in the piece. And if I put the line right about here, then sure enough, there's the horizon line. So let's just kind of mess around and see if we can't find where the vanishing point is. I see all the lines kind of going into the middle here, right smack dab in the center, because that's where the cameraman stood. So if I take, let's look at these corners of these chairs over here. How about this row? It's a little bit bigger. And we make a little dot over here, and we connect it to these corners. Sure enough, they all line up, and they go to one area. I don't see these corners going to any other areas. Let's look at the tops of the chairs over here, too. Sure enough, they are flat, just as flat as the horizon line. So it's got an x-axis. It also has a y-axis. These chairs go straight up and down, even though in reality they're slightly slanted, because it's easier on the back that way. And that looks like one-point perspective. That's an example of one-point perspective. Notice how there's not much action going on in there. All right, let's take a look at another one-point perspective shot. This camera's tilted slightly. All right, let's draw a flat line and see if we can't find where the horizon line is in this. So I've got my horizon line, and I'm looking at areas where where everything gets perfectly flat. If you look right over here, see how this area is kind of a downward slant? But still, this area over here is kind of at an angle too. We got to find the middle area, and right about here is where I see it's at. And notice how the horizon line is really low. That's because the purpose of this shot was to show off the buildings, the cool cityscape right up here. All right, so remember, if you want to show off the sky, have your horizon line low. If you want to show off the ground, have your horizon line way up here. Way up top would be a bird's eye view. Down here near the bottom, we call that a worm's eye view. Or you can come up with another creative word, like a grasshopper's eye view. So let's see if we can't find the vanishing point here. What you can do is you can draw a line. See, right now, just looking at this picture, I can't exactly see right off the bat where this vanishing point is at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line down these connecting surfaces here. And sure enough, if I connect this side of the building way down here, I can see the vanishing point is right about in this area. Let's see if we can't confirm that with this other part of the building right up here. Oh, sure enough, it connects to the top of this building. Let's try this side. Click on the vanishing point. Oh my gosh, yeah, line's right up, perfect. Pretty neat. Buildings are great for doing one-point perspective. It's a great way to show off depth and volume. And that, students, is how you find a vanishing point in a picture. Pretty interesting stuff. All right, let's do one more, just for kicks. All right, there's a really cool one that I found. Oh yeah, a sushi bar. You guys ever had sushi before? It's one of my favorite foods. And it doesn't have to be cooked raw. Seriously, there's tons of cooked sushi out there. It's just the way it's prepared. So, let's take a look at this one. Let's see if we can find the horizon line. Now the horizon line, once again, we'll be able to tell once we can't see on top of anything else. So right here, I can see underneath this area. So if I were to draw a horizon line right about here, that means it would be too high. Likewise, right about here, I can see the top of the table. We need to find a happy middle in there. And I see it is right about here is the horizon line. All right? Let's see if we can't find the vanishing point. One of the ways to do that is simply just to follow the angles of one of your receding forms. Voila! Let's check the table and see if it lines up with this little spot right here in the middle. Sure does. Let's try the edges of these tables over here. Yep. Nifty. So that's 1 point perspective. Once again, 1 point perspective has a flat left to right x-axis. It has a straight up and down y-axis. And lastly, it's got only one z-axis. And the z-axis, it happens to be where the lines or the planes that recede into the distance go. All right? So, if you found it helpful, we'll get into more detail on how exactly to construct all those different irregular forms and such in the future. And I look forward to talking with you later.